He was about to get the biggest promotion of his career, until he saw her, a homeless teen who reminded him of his lost daughter. His choice that morning seemed foolish, until the CEO revealed a truth that left everyone in tears. James Morton's alarm buzzed at exactly 5:30 a.m. He didn't need it. He'd been awake for 20 minutes already, staring at the ceiling. His right hand moved automatically to silence the noise, just like it had every morning for the past 5 years. The house was quiet, too quiet. He pushed himself up from the bed, his feet finding the cold hardwood floor. The empty side of the bed hadn't been slept in for years, but he still avoided looking at it. Another day, he muttered, walking to the bathroom. The mirror showed what he expected: gray hair, tired eyes, perfect posture. He straightened his back even more. The shower took exactly 8 minutes. The shaving took 5. Everything in its place, everything on schedule. James pulled his clothes from the closet. All identical white suits, all perfectly pressed. He bought them in bulk after the promotion to executive level. Made things simpler. He was adjusting his tie when his eyes caught the photo on the dresser. He didn't mean to look at it, he never did, but it happened every morning anyway. Emily's smile frozen in time, her graduation photo from middle school. The frame had collected dust. He hadn't touched it since the accident. Not today, he said to the empty room. His voice sounded rough. He cleared his throat and checked his watch. 6:15 a.m. The kitchen was spotless. He'd cleaned it the night before, like always. The coffee maker kicked in automatically. 1 cup black. 2 pieces of toast, no butter. The morning paper sat unopened on the counter. He'd read it at the office. James grabbed his briefcase, real leather, a gift from the board last Christmas, and headed for the door. The security system chirped as he entered the code. The morning air hit him with a blast of winter cold. His car waited in the driveway, but he walked past it. The office was only 20 blocks away, and he'd walked every day since Emily. The exercise helped, or at least it's what his therapist had said back when he still went. The city was waking up, shop owners pulling up metal shutters, street cleaners finishing their rounds. The usual faces nodding as he passed. The newsstand guy, the coffee cart woman, the crossing guard at 5th. James checked his watch again. 6:45 a.m. Right on schedule. The big meeting with the CEO was at 9 a.m. The promotion was practically his. 5 years of perfect performance reviews, countless weekends at the office, networking at every corporate event. He played the game perfectly. He turned the corner onto Marshall Street. Something was different. The usual morning crowd looked disturbed. Business people walking wider around something. No, someone on the sidewalk. James saw the pink coat first. Too big, worn out at the elbows. Then the dark hands clutching a rosary. Then the girl's face, young, black, couldn't be more than 15. She was huddled against the building wall, trying to make herself smaller. His feet stopped moving. Emily would have been 15 this year. "Sir? You're blocking the sidewalk." Someone bumped past him, muttering about people who couldn't walk properly. James checked his watch again. 6:52 a.m. He was going to be late. The CEO meeting. The promotion. Everything he'd worked for. The girl's eyes met his. They were red-rimmed, but dry. Proud, maybe, or just too tired to cry. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably Sandra from the office, making sure he'd review the quarterly reports before the meeting. He should keep walking. He needed to keep walking. Something white caught his eye, a crumpled photo near the girl's feet. The wind tried to take it, but she quickly pressed it down with one hand. He caught a glimpse, a family smiling whole. James's hand tightened on his briefcase. Emily's voice echoed in his head. "Dad, you always said we should help people. What's your name?" The words came out before he could stop them. The girl looked up, suspicious. People had probably asked before, probably made promises before. "Sarah," she said finally. "I'm James." He glanced at his watch again. 6:55 a.m. "Are you hungry, Sarah?" She didn't answer, but her eyes flicked to the coffee shop across the street. "I work in that building." He pointed to the glass tower 2 blocks away. "They have a cafeteria. Real food, not just coffee." Sarah's fingers tightened on the rosary. Why? James thought about Emily, about the promotion, about 5 years of walking past people who needed help, always too busy, always too important to stop. "Because it's cold out here," he said simply. And because I can, she studied him for a long moment. Behind them, the stream of business people continued to flow around them, like water around rocks. They won't let me in there, Sarah said finally. Places like that, they don't want people like me. James straightened his tie. I'm an executive. They'll let you in. You'll get in trouble. Probably. He held out his hand. Coming. Sarah looked at his hand, then at his face. Slowly, carefully, she gathered her few belongings. The rosary, the photo, a small backpack, and stood up. James's phone buzzed again. He ignored it. Follow me, he said, and started walking toward the tower. After a moment, he heard her footsteps behind him. The morning crowd parted around them. James felt their stares, heard their whispers. His perfectly ordered world was about to get very messy. He checked his watch one last time. 7 a.m. The CEO meeting was in 2 hours. Everything was about to change. Behind him, Sarah's footsteps got stronger, more confident. James thought about Emily again, but this time, he didn't push the memory away. Sometimes he realized being late was exactly on time. They approached the glass doors of Morton Technologies. The security guard's eyes widened as he saw them coming. James straightened his back. The day was just beginning. The security guard's hand moved to his radio as James and Sarah approached. Frank, James had known him for 5 years, had bought him coffee countless mornings, suddenly looked like a stranger. Mr. Morton, Frank said, blocking the entrance. Is there something I can help you with? James felt Sarah tense behind him. I'm bringing a guest to breakfast, Frank. That's all. Sir, Frank's eyes darted between them. There are protocols. I need to call this in. Call it in, then. James's voice was steady. He turned to Sarah. It's okay. Wait here a moment. Frank stepped away, radio buzzing with whispered conversations. Sarah hugged her backpack closer. I told you, she said quietly. I should go. No. James watched as other employees started arriving, their faces a mix of confusion and disgust as they skirted around Sarah. Just wait. The elevator lobby behind the glass doors was filling up. James recognized faces. People he'd worked with for years, had lunch meetings with, exchanged holiday cards with. Now they stared, phones out, not even trying to hide their interest. Frank returned, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Morton, security supervisor, says dash. Tell him to call Gerald Matthews. James pulled out his business card, wrote a number on the back. That's his direct line. Tell him James Morton is invoking executive privilege for a breakfast guest. Frank hesitated, then made the call. James heard the conversation. Sir? Yes, sir. But she's... Yes, Mr. Matthews. Understood. The radio clicked off. Frank's face was red. Go ahead, Mr. Morton. But she'll need a visitor badge. Thank you, Frank. James gestured to Sarah. Come on. The glass doors opened with their usual soft whoosh. Sarah's worn sneakers squeaked against the marble floor. The lobby fell silent except for that squeak and the clicking of James's dress shoes. Names? The receptionist's smile was plastic. James Morton, Executive Development. And Sarah. He realized he didn't know her last name. Just Sarah, she whispered. The receptionist's fingers hovered over her keyboard. I need a last name for the system. Put her under my authorization, James said. Morton, guest. A visitor badge printed out. The receptionist held it like it might bite her. James took it, handed it to Sarah. Put this on. We're going to the 40th floor. The elevator crowd parted as they approached. James heard whispers. Is he crazy? Lost his daughter. Career suicide. He pressed the button. The elevator arrived empty. A small mercy. As the doors closed, he caught a glimpse of Frank already on the phone again, probably calling up the chain of command. Are you really going to lose your job? Sarah asked as they ascended. Her voice echoed in the empty elevator. No. James watched the floor numbers climb. Maybe. We'll see. Why are you doing this? The elevator passed the 30th floor. James thought about the CEO meeting, about the promotion, about Emily. Because sometimes you have to choose who you want to be. The cafeteria on 40 was just opening. Morning staff looked up as they entered, then quickly looked away. James led Sarah to the buffet line. Get whatever you want, he said. As much as you want. Sarah stared at the food, eggs, bacon, pancakes, fruit, pastries. Her hands shook slightly as she picked up a plate. "Sir?" A cafeteria worker approached, wringing her hands. "I'm sorry, but put it on my account." James cut her off. "Everything she wants. It's not about the money, sir. We have health regulations. Call Matthews." James's voice carried across the now silent cafeteria. "Or should I call him myself? We can discuss health regulations and discrimination lawsuits over breakfast." The worker retreated. Sarah had frozen, plate half filled. Everyone staring. "Let them." James grabbed his own plate, filled it with his usual eggs, toast, black coffee. "We're just having breakfast." They sat by the window. The sun was fully up now, glinting off neighboring buildings. Sarah ate slowly, carefully, like someone used to making food last. James's phone buzzed again. Messages were piling up. "Emergency meeting 8 a.m. Your office. What are you doing?" Board members concerned. "Matthews wants explanation." "Bad?" Sarah asked, watching his face. "Nothing I can't handle." He put the phone away. "How's the food?" "Good." She hesitated. "Really good. Thank you." The cafeteria was filling up now. Every table except theirs was full. James recognized the pattern. People clustered together, talking behind hands, shooting glances their way. His supervisor, Richard, appeared at their table. "James." "A word?" "I'm having breakfast, Richard." "Now, James." Richard's face was tight. "Your judgment is being questioned." James set down his coffee. "By whom?" "Everyone." Richard hissed. "Have you lost your mind? Bringing Esther? Bringing her here? Today of all days?" Sarah's fork had stopped moving. Her eyes were down, but James saw her knuckles whiten around the utensil. "Richard," James said calmly, "either join us for breakfast or leave. Those are your options." Richard's face turned purple. "Meeting. Your office. 5 minutes." He stormed off. "I'm causing you trouble," Sarah said quietly. James watched Richard stabbing at his phone as he walked away. "No, they're causing trouble. There's a difference." She looked up finally. "Why aren't you afraid? Everyone else here, they look at me like I'm going to steal something." "I used to be afraid," James said. "Of everything. Losing status. Losing face. Losing control." He smiled slightly. "Then I lost something that mattered, and I realized how much time I'd wasted being afraid of the wrong things." Sarah's fingers touched her crumpled photo, still in her coat pocket. "Your daughter?" "Emily." James checked his watch. 7:55 a.m. "She would have liked you." "How do you know?" "Because you're brave." He stood up. "Come on. We have a meeting to attend." Sarah gathered her things. She hadn't left so much as a crumb on the table. As they walked out, James noticed something. The whispers had changed. Some faces showed something new. Not disgust or judgment. Something else. The elevator ride down to the executive floor was silent. Sarah's visitor badge caught the light, reflecting off the polished walls. James's office door was ahead. He could see people already inside. Richard, HR representatives, probably legal too. "Ready?" he asked Sarah. She nodded, clutching her backpack. James straightened his tie, unnecessarily. Perfect creases, perfect knot. Some habits died hard. He opened the door. The morning was about to get interesting. 6 people waited in James's office. Richard stood by the window, phone still in hand. 2 HR representatives sat primly on the visitor chairs. A woman from legal, James didn't know her name, leaned against his desk like she owned it. 2 board members hovered near the door. Outside, James told Sarah quietly, "Wait here." He pointed to his assistant's empty desk. She nodded and sat down, her backpack clutched in her lap. The pink coat looked even more worn under the office lights. James closed his office door. The click sounded final. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Richard started before the door was fully shut. 5 years of perfect judgment, and now this? "Sit down, Richard." James walked to his desk. The legal woman, Thompson, he remembered now, didn't move. "I'll stand," she said. "This won't take long." James sat in his chair anyway. "Then let's begin." "You've created a massive liability," Thompson said. "Security breach, health code violations, potential workplace safety issues." "She's 15, James said quietly. "She's an unknown individual," one of the HR reps cut in. "No background check." no identification, no guardian consent. And on today of all days, Richard paced by the window. The CEO meeting. Your promotion. Everything we've worked for. James looked at each face in turn. People he'd worked with for years. People who'd smiled at his jokes, congratulated him on deals, sent sympathy cards after Emily. Are you having some kind of breakdown? The second HR rep leaned forward. We understand. With the anniversary coming up, don't. James's voice cut through the room. Don't use my daughter. We're concerned, Thompson said. Your behavior dash my behavior? James stood up slowly. Let's talk about behavior. Let's talk about six-figure executives afraid of a hungry teenager. Let's talk about health codes being used as weapons. Let's talk about what kind of people we've become. That's enough. Richard stepped forward. James, I'm suspending your building access, pending a psychological evaluation. James's computer chimed. New emails were flooding in. Meeting with CEO canceled, urgent performance review update, security protocol violation report, conduct investigation notice, the words blurred together on his screen. 5 years of perfect evaluations disappearing in an hour. A knock at the door. Sarah's face appeared in the glass, worried. Behind her, James could see other employees gathering, pretending to work while watching the drama unfold. Get rid of her, Thompson said. Now, maybe we can contain this. James walked to his window. 40 stories below, the street where he'd found Sarah was barely visible. Would he have seen Emily if she needed help? Or would he have walked past, too busy, too important, too afraid? James, Richard's voice softened. Think about what you're doing. 5 years of work. The promotion. Your future. My future. James turned around. Do you know what Emily's last words to me were? The room went silent. I'm proud of you, Dad, James said. She was proud of me. Me, who worked 60-hour weeks. Me, who missed her school plays for board meetings. Me, who taught her to care about people and then showed her that status mattered more. This isn't about your daughter, Thompson started. It's exactly about her. James walked to his door. And about Sarah. And about who we choose to be when no one's watching. Except someone's always watching, aren't they? Our children. Learning what we really value. He opened the door. Sarah looked up, eyes wide. Sir, one of the board members spoke for the first time. This is career suicide. No, James said. This is career clarity. His computer chime began. New message from the CEO's office. Meeting back on. 9 a.m. Bring her. The room erupted. You can't dash. The board won't dash. Think about dash, Sarah, James said over the noise. Ready to meet the CEO. She stood up, clutching her backpack. The gathered employees quickly looked away, pretending to be busy. James, Richard called after him. Don't do this. James stopped at his office door. Emily would have been 15 this year, he said quietly. Every morning, I walk past people who need help. Every morning, I think someone else will stop. Every morning, I hear her voice asking why I didn't. He checked his watch. 8:30 a.m. Coming, he asked Sarah. She nodded, falling in a step beside him. The crowd parted as they walked to the elevator. James felt lighter somehow, even as his phone buzzed with more messages, more warnings, more threats. The elevator doors opened. Inside, their reflections stood side by side. The man in the perfect white suit, the girl in the worn pink coat. Top floor, James said, pressing the button. Sarah's hand found his, squeezed once quickly. A thank you, maybe? Or forgiveness. The doors closed. They started to rise. The top floor was different. Marble floors, wood panel walls, art that cost more than most employees' yearly salaries. The elevator opened into a reception area large enough to fit James's entire department. Mr. Morton, the CEO's secretary, stood up. Her eyes went straight to Sarah. You're early, Jennifer. James nodded. We'll wait. Actually, Jennifer glanced at her computer screen. HR called. They're sending someone up. Sarah's shoulders tensed. James led her to the waiting area's leather chairs. Sit. It's okay. The elevator dinged. Thompson from legal stepped out, followed by a man James didn't recognize. He wore a security uniform with captain stripes. Mr. Morton, the security captain approached. We need to discuss the situation. No situation to discuss. James stayed seated. We're waiting for a meeting. Thompson pulled out her phone. I have an email from HR. Your access has been suspended pending a meeting with me. A new voice. Everyone turned. The CEO stood in his doorway. Gerald Matthews, 65 years old, looked exactly like the photos in the company newsletters, steel gray hair, expensive suit, presence that filled the room. Mr. Matthews, Thompson started. We have serious security concerns in my office. Matthews turned around. All of you? Sarah hesitated. James touched her shoulder. Come on. The CEO's office was bigger than some houses. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the entire city. A massive desk dominated one end, but Matthews led them to a sitting area with leather couches. Sit, he pointed. Everyone, they sat. Thompson and the security captain on one couch, James and Sarah on another. Matthews took an armchair, studying them all. Talk, he said finally. Thompson jumped in. Sir, Mr. Morton brought an unauthorized individual into the building. No background check, no ID, no dash. James? Matthews cut her off. Your turn. James felt Sarah trembling slightly beside him. I found someone who needed help. I helped. Breaking multiple company policies, Thompson interjected. Which ones? Matthews asked. Sir? Which policies exactly? Matthews leaned forward. Quote them. Thompson flipped through her phone. Section 4.3, Visitor Protocols. Section 7.2, Security Requirements. Section dash, Stop. Matthews held up a hand. James, why today? Why not today? Don't play games. You had the promotion meeting. 5 years of perfect work. Why risk it? James looked at Sarah. She sat perfectly still, eyes down, trying to be invisible. Just like on the street. My daughter, James said quietly. Emily. She would have been Sarah's age. The car accident. Matthews nodded. I remember the memo. Memo. James's voice hardened. My daughter died, and it was a memo? The room went silent. Even Thompson stopped typing on her phone. Tell me about this morning, Matthews said finally. James told him. The walk to work, Sarah on the street, the photo, the cafeteria, the meetings. Through it all, Sarah stayed silent, but her hands gripped her backpack tighter at certain parts. As he finished, James's phone buzzed. He ignored it. Check it, Matthews said. James pulled out his phone. A company-wide email. Security alert. Unauthorized access incident on 40th floor. All employees advised to secure valuables and report suspicious activity. Did you authorize this? Matthews asked Thompson. She straightened. Standard protocol for security breaches dash. For a teenage girl eating breakfast? James stood up. This is what we've become? What I've been part of? Sit down, James. Matthews's voice was quiet but firm. No. James paced to the windows. 5 years I've worked here. 5 years since Emily. Know what I did the morning she died? Missed her call. Had a meeting. Couldn't talk. She wanted to tell me something important. But I had a meeting. Sarah made a small sound. James turned. Tears ran down her face. So today, he continued, when I saw Sarah, I had a choice. Meeting or meaning, status or humanity. Emily's voice in my head asking why I always chose wrong. His phone buzzed again. More emails, more messages. The company machine grinding into action against a perceived threat. You understand, Thompson said to Matthews, we have protocols dash protocols. James laughed. Emily died because of protocols. Hospital had protocols. Police had protocols. Insurance had protocols. Everyone very sorry, but protocols. Matthews stood up, walked to his desk, picked up a frame. Sarah, he said suddenly, the photo in your pocket. Show me. Sarah looked up startled. Slowly, she pulled out the crumpled photo. Matthews walked back, held out his frame. Same photo. The room went silent. Dad? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Thompson's phone clattered to the floor. My daughter, Matthews said quietly, decided to conduct an experiment. Didn't you, Sarah? Sarah stood up. Her face changed, still tears, but different now. You. James stepped back. I wanted to know, Sarah said. Her voice was stronger, educated. After Mom died, You changed. The company changed. I wanted to know if anyone would stop, if anyone would help. 3 days, Matthews said. She's been out there 3 days. Hundreds of employees walked past. Only you stopped, James. Thompson was already typing frantically on her phone, probably trying to recall the security alert. The security captain had backed away, face pale. You knew? James asked Matthews. Of course I knew. My daughter doesn't vanish for 3 days without me knowing. But she asked me to trust her, to let her prove a point. And I proved it, Sarah said. Didn't I, Dad? About what the company's become. James sat down heavily. All this time, you were the only one, Sarah said. The only one who stopped, who risked something to help. Matthews walked to his desk, pressed a button. Jennifer, send in the camera crew. Camera crew? James looked up. Company training video, Matthews said. About corporate culture. About who we want to be. He smiled slightly. About protocols. The door opened. People with cameras entered. The promotion is yours, Matthews told James. If you want it, but I have a different proposal too. One Sarah helped me understand we need. Sarah sat beside James. I'm sorry for the deception, she said quietly. But you proved something today. Something important. James looked at his phone. The security alert had been replaced by a new company-wide email. Immediate announcement. New corporate social responsibility division. Director position opening. Inquire within? Well, Matthews asked. Interested? James looked at Sarah, then at the city below. Somewhere down there, another person needed help. Another choice waited. Yes, he said. Very interested. Matthews nodded. Good. Now, about those protocols? The cameras rolled. Change was coming. The next hour passed in a blur of cameras, questions, and revelations. James sat in the CEO's office, watching as Sarah and her father explained their plan to the gathered executives and film crew. We'll need you to clear out your old office, Matthews was saying. The Social Responsibility Division needs the entire east wing of the 40th floor. James nodded, still processing. His phone had finally stopped buzzing. Word had spread fast after Matthews' announcement. I should. He stood up, straightening his tie automatically. I should go talk to my team? I'll come with you, Sarah said. She'd changed somehow, still wearing the pink coat, but her posture was different. Confident, educated. The street kid act had vanished. The elevator ride down was silent. Different tension now. James could feel Sarah wanting to say something. You're angry, she said finally, as they reached the 40th floor. No. James watched the numbers light up. Surprised. Confused maybe, but you understand why we did it? The doors opened. The office floor was unusually quiet. Every head turned as they walked past. Mr. Morton, his assistant jumped up. Your office. There. James could see through the glass walls. People were packing his things. Richard supervised, pointing at boxes. It's fine, Susan, James said. They're supposed to be. Richard saw them coming. His face went through several expressions: anger, confusion, fear. James, I can explain, Dash. Step out, Richard. James's voice was quiet. Everyone, step out. The packers hurried past, not meeting his eyes. Richard hesitated. Now, Richard. The office emptied. James sat at his desk, his former desk, one last time. Sarah perched on the edge of a chair. 3 days? He asked. 3 days, 4 hours, 17 minutes. She pulled out her phone. Not the burner phone she'd pretended to have, but the latest model. I documented everything. Every person who walked past. Every comment. Every look. James turned to his computer. Logged in one last time. Started reading emails from the past hour. Congratulations on your promotion. Looking forward to working with a new division. Always knew you were a man of principle. They're all lying, Sarah said, watching him read. This morning they were ready to destroy you. Now they're falling over themselves to align with the CEO's daughter's project. Your project? James corrected. Not just his. Our project now. She leaned forward. That's why we chose you. Why I chose you. Not just because you stopped, but because of why you stopped. James opened his drawer. Emily's photo was there like always. He packed it carefully in his briefcase. When Mom died, Sarah continued, Dad threw himself into work. The company culture changed. Everything became about protocols, procedures, profits. The human element vanished. I remember, James said. Claire's death. It hit everyone hard, but no one did anything. They all just watched him turn the company into this. She gestured at the office. A place where helping someone is seen as a security threat. A knock at the door. Thompson stood there, different expression now. Smiling. James! I just wanted to say no. James didn't look up. Whatever it is, no. Thompson's smile faltered. She retreated. See? Sarah said. They're already repositioning. By tomorrow, they'll all claim they supported you from the start. James finished packing his personal items. Not much, really. One briefcase worth. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. In the cafeteria, during the meetings. Why let it go so far? We needed it to be real. Sarah stood up, paced to the window. Dad wanted to just create a training video, do it with actors. I said no. We needed to see what people would actually do. And I was your test subject? You were everyone's test subject. The whole company's. And they failed. All except you. Another knock. Richard again. James, the movers need to dash. Get out, Richard. But dash, get out. Richard left. James could see him through the glass, already on his phone, probably calling Matthews, trying to save his position. You know what's going to happen? Sarah turned from the window. They're going to fight us? Not openly. They can't. Not with Dad's backing. But they'll try to water down the changes, maintain the status quo, protect their power. Probably, James agreed. The question is, she faced him fully. Are you ready for that fight? Because it's going to be harder than this morning. Much harder. James looked at his briefcase. At Emily's photo. At the office he'd worked so hard to earn. Your father, he said slowly. The day Claire died. I saw him change. Saw the company change. And I did nothing. Just followed protocols. And now. James stood up. Now I think it's time to break some protocols. Sarah smiled. A real smile. Not the scared one she'd worn on the street. Good answer. Mr. Morton? Susan poked her head in. The CEO's office called. They need you both upstairs. Something about a press conference. James picked up his briefcase. Ready? Sarah straightened her pink coat. The coat that probably cost more than most people's wardrobes, but had been carefully distressed for her role. Born ready. They walked out together. The office watched them go. Some faces worried, some calculating, some already practicing new expressions of support. They're going to try to stop us, Sarah said in the elevator. Let them try. The doors closed. They headed up to face the press, the protocols, and the fight ahead. Together. The press room was packed. James stood backstage, watching through a gap in the curtain as reporters filled every seat. TV cameras lined the back wall. The company hadn't held a press conference this big since Claire Matthews died. Nervous? Sarah asked beside him. Should I be? Dad's about to announce the biggest corporate restructuring in company history. She checked her phone. Stocks already dropping, just from the rumors. Matthews appeared behind them. He'd changed suits, camera ready dark blue now. Ready? 1 minute? Sarah pulled James aside. There's something you should know. But before she could continue, Thompson hurried up, tablet in hand. Sir, the board is requesting an emergency meeting before the announcement. No. Matthews didn't even look at her. Sir, they're threatening legal action. The shareholders dash, the shareholders. Matthews said quietly. We'll understand once they hear the full plan. He turned to James. You'll sit between us. United Front. James nodded. His phone buzzed Richard again. He declined the call. Places, a stage manager called. Wait. Sarah grabbed James's arm. I need to tell you dash. 30 seconds. Matthews straightened his tie. Time to face the music. They walked onto the stage. Camera flashes exploded. James felt Sarah tense beside him as they sat down. Good morning. Matthews leaned into the microphone. Thank you for coming on such short notice. The room quieted. Reporters leaned forward. James could see company employees lining the walls, phones ready to record. 5 years ago, Matthews continued, we lost our way. When my wife Claire died, I made changes, implemented protocols, created systems, built walls. More cameras flashed. Sarah's hand found James's under the table, squeezed once. I thought I was protecting the company. Instead, I was killing its soul. Matthews paused. My daughter helped me see that, through an experiment that revealed just how far we'd fallen. Murmurs in the crowd. Reporters typing frantically. This morning, my daughter Sarah posed as a homeless teenager outside our building. Over 3 days, hundreds of our employees walked past her. Only one stopped. Only one chose humanity over protocol. All eyes turned to James. More flashes. James Morton, Matthews gestured, will head our new social responsibility division. But more than that, he represents the change we need. The change we dash, the back doors burst open. Board members flooded in. This press conference is unauthorized, one called out. The board has not approved dash, another started. The board, Matthews' voice cut through the chaos, works for the shareholders. And as majority shareholder, I am exercising my right to dash. You're not majority shareholder anymore. The room went silent. Sarah's hand tightened on James's. What? Matthews turned to the board members. Emergency board meeting, 10 minutes ago. Thompson stepped forward. Your shares have been diluted. The new funding round. Impossible. Matthews stood up. I have controlling interest. Thompson corrected. The board voted to accept an emergency investment from Vista Capital. They now own 51%. Cameras were rolling. Reporters shouting questions. James felt Sarah trying to tell him something, but the noise was too loud. You can't do this, Matthews said, but his voice had lost its authority. It's done. Thompson smiled. Security will escort you out. All of you. Guards appeared at the exits. The same guards who'd tried to stop Sarah that morning. Dad! Sarah stood up. I tried to warn you. I saw the paperwork on Thompson's desk this morning. They've been planning this. Matthews staggered slightly. James caught his arm. All those protocols, Sarah continued. All those systems. They weren't protecting the company. They were setting this up. Clear the room. Thompson ordered. This conference is over. Reporters protested as guards began herding them out. Company employees vanished through side doors. 5 years, Matthews said quietly. They waited 5 years. Since Mom died, Sarah nodded. Since you stopped paying attention to the details, James watched the room empty. Watch Thompson take Matthews' place at the microphone. This isn't over, he said. No. Sarah's voice hardened. It's not. Get them out. Thompson ordered the guards. Wait. James stepped forward. You forgot something? What? He smiled. Emily taught me one thing before she died. Always back up your files. James pulled out his phone. Press play. His voice filled the room. Testing, testing. Recording morning of incident. Subject. Board collusion with Vista Capital. Evidence of share manipulation and... Thompson's face went white. The guards stopped moving. I record all my meetings, James said quietly. Protocol, you know. Sarah laughed suddenly. You knew? All morning you knew? I suspected. When Richard started making calls about an emergency board vote. James shrugged. Protocols have their uses. Matthews straightened. Authority flowed back into his stance. Thompson, he said, in my office. Now. He turned to the remaining reporters. It seems we have a different story to tell. The guards backed away. Sarah hugged her father, then James. Still on the job? Matthews asked James. James looked at his phone. One last message from Richard. Whatever they're offering, I'll double it. He deleted it. Yes, he said. But we do this right. No more protocols without purpose. Agreed? Matthews headed for the door. Thompson trailing behind like a scolded child. Sarah grinned at James. You really had evidence all along? No. He showed her his phone screen. Voice memo app. Recording time. Midnight. Then why did they? Because that's what protocols do, James said. Make you forget to think. Make you react instead of reason. Sarah's grin widened. Dad's right. You are perfect for this job. They walked out together, leaving the empty press room behind. Sometimes the best protocols were the ones you broke. The next hour transformed Morton Technologies. Security escorted Thompson and her allies out while Matthews orchestrated damage control. James and Sarah watched from the CEO's office as the drama unfolded through the glass walls. Vista Capital is already retracting, Sarah said, reading from her phone. They're claiming Thompson misrepresented the board's authority. Of course they are. James stood by the window, watching people leave the building. Some carried boxes, others just their shame. No one wants to be on the wrong side of a corporate war. Is that what this is? Sarah perched on her father's desk. The pink coat was gone now, replaced by a tailored blazer that probably cost more than James's car. You tell me, you started it? She looked at him carefully. Are you still angry about the deception? No. James turned from the window. But I am curious. Why really do all this? The homeless act, the 3 days on the street. There had to be easier ways. Matthews walked in before she could answer. He looked tired but satisfied. Thompson's singing, he said. Turns out she's been planning this since Claire died. Use my grief as cover to restructure the company from the inside. And the others? James asked, running scared. HR's already received 12 resignations. Matthews sat heavily in his chair. We'll need to rebuild half the executive team. Good. Sarah stood up. We needed to clean house anyway. James watched them, father and daughter, so similar in their determination. But something still didn't add up. Why me? He asked suddenly. You could have picked anyone to help your homeless daughter. Why wait for me? Matthews and Sarah exchanged looks. Show him, Matthews said. Sarah pulled out her phone, found something, handed it to James. A news article from 5 years ago. Local executive loses daughter in tragic accident. Below it, a comment thread, heartbreaking. Mr. Morton helped my son get into college last year. He's one of the good ones. James gave my daughter her first internship. Changed her life. Morton's the only exec who remembers the cleaning staff's names. We did our research, Sarah said softly. Asked around. Watched. You were different even before Emily died. After, you changed, but not like Dad did. You got quieter, but you didn't stop caring. You just stopped showing it, Matthews added. Started following protocols instead of your heart. James handed the phone back. His throat felt tight. The company needs change, Sarah continued. Real change, not just PR stunts. We needed someone who understood loss but hadn't let it make them hard. Someone who could rebuild the human side of Morton Technologies. And you thought pretending to be homeless was the way to prove that. No. She smiled slightly. That was my idea. Dad wanted focus groups and consultants. I said we needed to see who people really were when they thought no one important was watching. 3 days, James said. Hundreds of people. 642, Sarah corrected. I counted. Most ignored me completely. 57 told me to go away. 12 called security. 2 offered money, but wouldn't meet my eyes. One stopped, Matthews finished. One saw a person, not a protocol. The office fell silent. Outside, the city continued its endless motion. Somewhere down there, another person needed help. So what now? James asked. Matthews pressed a button on his desk phone. Jennifer, send in the camera crew again. And get PR up here. Now, Sarah grinned. We show the world what real corporate responsibility looks like. The door opened. People with cameras entered, followed by nervous-looking PR executives. Mr. Morton, a young PR woman stepped forward. We've drafted a statement about your heroic dash. No. James cut her off. No heroes. Just people doing what people should do. But the narrative the narrative, Sarah interrupted, is that we failed. That I sat on that street for 3 days watching humanity die by degrees. That only one person in a company of thousands remembered we're more than our protocols. The stock price dash will reflect who we really are, Matthews said. Not who we pretend to be. The cameras started rolling. James straightened his tie, old habits. Tell us about this morning, the interviewer said. James looked at Sarah, then at the city beyond the windows. I was late to work, he began, and exactly on time to remember who I used to be. The story spilled out. Not the PR version. Not the corporate narrative. Just truth. Raw and real. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Perfect, the director said. Now about the new division dash, tomorrow, Matthews cut in. Right now, I believe my daughter and Mr. Morton have some work to do. Sarah raised an eyebrow. We do. The shelter on 4th Street, James said, understanding. The one you sat across from for 3 days. They could use some corporate responsibility, Matthews smiled. Now. The PR woman looked panicked. But the press releases can wait. James stood up. Coming, Sarah? She smiled, grabbed her coat, the expensive one this time. Dad, she asked. Matthews waved them out. Go. Show them who we really are. They left the cameras behind. Left the protocols and PR and corporate games. Time to do what mattered. Time to stop walking past. The 4th Street shelter looked different in the afternoon light. 3 stories of faded brick, windows patched with cardboard in places. A line had formed outside, people waiting for the evening meal service to begin. I watched them, Sarah said as they walked up. Every day. Some come straight from the office towers. Still wearing suits, but the clothes get older each week. James nodded. He recognized the signs now that she pointed them out. The careful way some people held themselves. The practiced invisibility. Marcus! Sarah called out. A large man at the door looked up, smiled. Little Miss Fancy Coat, he said. Back so soon? You knew? James asked. Course I knew. Marcus laughed. Girl shows up in designer boots. Tries to scuff them up herself? Dead giveaway. Sarah blushed. I got better at it. No, you didn't. But your heart was right. Marcus looked at James. This the one? This is him. Marcus held out a massive hand. Been watching you too, Mr. Morton. Every morning, same time, same walk. Today was different. James shook his hand. Today, everything was different. Come in, both of you. Beth's been waiting. The shelter's interior was clean, but worn. Folding tables filled the main room. A kitchen door swung constantly as volunteers prepared the evening meal. Beth, a small woman in her 60s, appeared from an office. Look who's back. Sarah Matthews. Beth put her hands on her hips. Finally dropping the act? You too? James asked. Honey, I've been running this shelter for 30 years. You think I can't spot a rich girl playing poor? Beth hugged Sarah. But she did good work. Helped in the kitchen, talked to people, learned their stories, and reported everything to Dad, Sarah added. Every person we turned away because we're over capacity. Every family we couldn't help because funding got cut. Speaking of funding, James pulled out his phone. What's your annual operating budget? Beth named a figure. James added a 0, showed it to Sarah. Per month, he said. Starting today? Beth sat down hard. You can't. Morton Technologies' new social responsibility division can. Sarah grinned. Consider it approved. But the board isn't a problem anymore. James started typing on his phone. You'll have the first transfer within the hour. Use it for repairs first, then staff, then expansion. I don't understand, Beth said. This morning Sarah was pretending to be homeless. And now we're done pretending anything. Sarah sat beside her. Remember what you told me yesterday? About how the system keeps people invisible? Time to make them visible, James said. Starting here? His phone buzzed. Matthews had texted. Press found out where you went. Coming your way. Ready? Heads up, James told Beth. Cameras arriving soon. Your choice. We can meet them outside. Or use them. Beth stood up. Marcus, get everyone together. Family meeting. The next hour transformed the shelter like the morning had transformed Morton Technologies. People shared stories, real stories, not PR versions. James and Sarah listened. Really listened. Cameras caught it all. Not posed charity photos, but real moments. A former bank executive showing James where he slept Sarah in the kitchen with women who'd fled abuse. Beth explaining how one medical bill could erase a lifetime of savings. Marcus organizing a job skills workshop. This is what we'll do, James told the cameras. Not charity. Change. Real change. Starting here, Sarah added. Starting now. When the cameras left, they stayed. Served dinner. Washed dishes. Learn names. You're different, Beth told James as they cleaned up. Most executives, they write checks. Stay clean. You're here, sleeves rolled up, doing work. My daughter, James said quietly, taught me that writing checks is easy. Showing up is what matters. Sarah appeared with more dishes. Dad texted. Board's officially dissolved. He's restructuring everything. Good. James checked his watch. Past midnight. Tomorrow we start the real work. Today, Sarah corrected. It's past midnight. Today we start. Beth watched them leave hours later. The shelter was quiet now, but different. Hope looked different in the nightlight. Coming back? Marcus asked them. James looked at Sarah. She nodded. Every day, he said. That's the new protocol. They walked to their cars, his modest sedan, her expensive hybrid. Both dusty from real work. Thank you, Sarah said suddenly. Not just for stopping this morning. For staying. For understanding. Thank you, James replied. For reminding me who I used to be. Who I should be. They drove away, leaving the shelter behind, but not forgotten. Never again forgotten. Sometimes new beginnings looked like endings. Sometimes endings were just the start. 1 month later, James stood in his new office. The east wing of the 40th floor had transformed. Gone were the sterile cubicles and closed doors. Now the space flowed openly, walls replaced with clear glass. Formerly empty corners filled with meeting areas furnished with comfortable chairs. Mr. Morton? His new assistant. He'd insisted Susan come with him. Poked her head in. They're ready. The conference room was full. Different crowd now. Shelter directors, social workers, community leaders. Sarah sat at one end of the table, taking notes on her laptop. Morning, James said. Let's begin. Beth from 4th Street Shelter started. We've helped 20 families find permanent housing this month. Job placement programs at 80% success rate. Numbers matter, James nodded. But tell me about Michael. Beth smiled. The banker? Started teaching financial literacy classes at the shelter. Had 15 people in yesterday's session. Around the table, similar stories emerged. Real stories. Real changes. Dad's waiting upstairs, Sarah announced as the meeting ended. Monthly review. They took the elevator together. James straightened his tie. Still white suit, still perfect creases, but different man wearing them. Matthew's office had changed too. Claire's photo still held the place of honor on his desk, but now it had company, pictures of shelter events, community programs, real people doing real work. Numbers look good, Matthews said as they entered. Stock's up 15% since the restructure. That's not why we're doing this, Sarah reminded him. No, but it helps convince others to follow our lead. Matthews handed them tablets. 3 more companies launched similar programs this week. James scrolled through the report. They're doing it for PR. At first, Matthews agreed. But real change happens in stages. They'll learn, like we did, Sarah added softly. A knock at the door. Jennifer entered with a young woman James didn't recognize. She wore a neat but clearly secondhand suit, clutching a folder like a shield. Maria Torres, Jennifer announced. Here for the interview. Ah, yes. Matthews stood. Our first candidate for the mentorship program. James. James led Maria to his office. She sat carefully, hands trembling slightly. Tell me your story, he said. She swallowed hard. I was an accountant. Good job, good life. Then my son got sick. Bills piled up. Lost everything. Found ourselves at 4th Street Shelter. Beth recommended you. Maria nodded. She said you'd understand. About losing things. About finding your way back. James touched the photo on his desk. Emily's smile frozen in time. I do understand. I'm not asking for charity, Maria said quickly. I want to work, to rebuild, to show my son that falling down isn't the same as staying down. Sarah appeared in the doorway. Listen quietly. The job's yours, James said. Just like that? Just like that? He stood up. Susan will help you with paperwork. You start Monday. Maria started crying. Not sad tears. Relief tears. Hope tears. After she left, Sarah sat in the visitor's chair. You didn't even look at her resume. Didn't need to. James smiled. Some things you know in your heart. Dad wants us at the shelter tonight. New program launch. I'll be there. James checked his calendar. Old habit, new purpose. After I meet with the construction team about the transitional housing project, Sarah stood to leave, then paused. Do you ever regret it? That morning, stopping for a stranger? No. James looked out at the city. Somewhere down there, another person needed help. Another choice waited. Best protocol I ever broke. The day continued. Meetings blended into action. Plans became reality. Every hour, things changed. Evening found them back at 4th Street Shelter. Different crowd now. Business suits mixed with worn jackets. Designer shoes beside patched boots. Real people sharing real food, real stories. Marcus manned the door like always. Mr. Morton, Little Miss Fancy Coat, still with a nickname? Sarah laughed. Always. Marcus gestured them in. Beth's got someone for you to meet. Inside, Beth stood with a teenage girl. Worn pink coat, too big for her. Dark hands clutching hope instead of a rosary. This is Angela, Beth said. She has a story to tell. James and Sarah exchanged looks. Full circle. Tell me your story, James said softly. Angela looked up. The same pride he'd seen in Sarah that morning. The same fear, the same hope. I was invisible, she began. Until today. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, change happened. One story at a time. One choice at a time. One moment of seeing instead of looking away. Emily would have been proud. Sarah squeezed his hand once, quickly. A thank you. A promise. A reminder. The work continued. And somewhere, another morning waited. Another choice. Another chance to remember who we are when protocols fall away and humanity remains. Just people helping people. Just like it should be.